Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I will be your host today, Joe Rosales of Sports Info Solutions, and with me is Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders. Welcome, Aaron.
Hey, here we are.
Yes. Today's... I was
going to say thank you for sitting in for Scott today, who was unavailable because I was unavailable yesterday because of illness, and so here we are. Same football, one day later.
Yes, exactly. I was going to say, unfortunately Scott can't be here today, but hopefully I can stand in adequately and do him justice. So let's do this. There was a football game last night, so why don't we start there, the Bengals and the Dolphins. The Bengals have been somewhat interesting to start the season. They only scored, 23 points against the Jets. They've scored 16 against the Steelers, 17 at home against the Broncos. Last night, 22 against the Dolphins at home. None of that sounds super impressive on the surface, but after 3 weeks, so not including last night's game, which may change things, obviously, but through 3 weeks, DVOA had the Bengals offense ranked 8th in the league. Is there something, or are there thoughts that you have on why DVOA may be a little bit more optimistic about the Bengals offense than these surface level stats might suggest?
Yeah, I think that the Bengals the offense has sort of been held back a little bit by their defense and special teams. They've faced a lot of long fields, and that's why DVOA has them better. If you look at the drive stats on Football Outsiders, that previous, not including last night's game, they were 28th in the league in average line of scrimmage per drive, starting line of scrimmage per drive. So they're 28th in special teams, and so that's causing the offense to have to go a little bit longer. They're avoiding turnovers for the most part. I mean, last night's game against Miami was really won by not having turnovers. Right. Part of that was fumble luck. They fumbled the ball twice and recovered both of them. Miami fumbled the ball once, and Cincinnati recovered that one too.
Right. And
then Miami threw a pick, and Andy Dalton didn't throw any picks. On primetime television even. Right. What a shock.
Yeah.
So the other problem that their offense is having is that the red zone offense hasn't been very good. They're 24th in DVOA in the red zone through 3 games. And then last night, I don't have the DVOA numbers done yet, but obviously they had to settle for field goals 4 times.
Right.
5 times.
5, yeah.
And so that's, obviously that does tend to regress a little bit towards the mean probably over the course of the season. They're probably not going to be this bad in the red zone the whole season. If they're one of the top offenses overall, they'll be at least better in the red zone than this. So
sure, but something
the DVOA is better than the actual points scored.
Okay, and something that actually struck me about it, last night's game is it seemed AJ Green was playing his otherworldly self and looked amazing, but otherwise that offense seemed to struggle. And there was, that one pass that Dalton had into the end zone that was sort of tipped and almost caught, but not quite. And, it seemed like they were really struggling to get things done when they weren't throwing to A.J. Green. So, is there any kinds of situations here you think that, do they miss Marvin Jones? Do they miss Mohamed Sanu? Do they miss Tyler Eifert, who's coming back soon? Is Brandon LaFell an adequate replacement or not? Are these things that might affect them going forward, or do you think there will be some, okay regression just given sort of the natural state of things?
Well, I mean, I think we thought that this was going to affect them before the season. Eifert, we knew Eifert would be out for a few games, and he's really important, and I think that is likely part of the red zone problem, right? Because he's a big red zone target. And we knew that losing the receivers was going to be a problem. I'm not sure if we thought Marvin Jones was as good as he's been, but if you look back, right, the Bengals offense struggled in 2014 largely because of injuries to all the receivers who were not A.J. Green. And maybe Marvin Jones is the one they really missed, and now they're without him too. But it's hard to tell because Sanu is missing too now. I think they miss Jones more, certainly. LaFell can do what Sanu can do.
Okay.
I mean, LaFell and Sanu are fairly similar. It's Marvin Jones is the guy I think that they're missing. When Eifert comes back, I mean, I think Dalton still has a good offense. The offensive line is still really good. The running backs are still good. The other thing, I mean, let's be honest, there's also a new offensive coordinator. And those of us who felt that Hugh Jackson was one of the most interesting, certainly, but also quality offensive play callers in the league, wouldn't be surprised at a little bit of a slowdown because you're getting a new offensive coordinator who maybe is not, doing the same things as Hugh Jackson or calling plays in the same way.
Sure. Yeah, okay. I mean, and you mentioned the offensive line and his protection still being fairly staunch. I mean, last year in 2015, Dalton was pressured on 8.9% of dropbacks. That was second best in the NFL. This year, at least again through 3 weeks, we don't have the data from last night's game, but that number was up a bit to 11.7%. Do you think that's just sort of a small sample size thing? Do you think that the Bengals offensive line will still protect him well this year?
I think it'll still protect him over time. I'm guessing that's a small sample. What was I going to say? Andrew Whitworth had a particularly poor game against Denver that is not his norm.
Okay. Yeah. That was the one thing. I saw some of that Denver game, and I kind of got the feeling from watching that game that there were two instances in which in the first half, which the Bengals should have had interceptions on Simeon, and I feel like that game could have gone a lot differently if they had, if they'd made those turnovers such that, because when we look at the final line, Simeon ended up with something like 4 touchdown passes, and I think those drives that Cincinnati didn't make those turnovers on, they went and scored points. He wasn't good in the
first half.
Right.
He wasn't good in the first half. I know people were calling me out on Twitter because in the first half I said, here's another chance for Simeon to blow the game. But he didn't look good in the first half. He looked so much better in the second half. But, of course, a lot of football games have that, right? I mean, a lot of football games you can go back and say, well, if only for this and this, things would have been different. So it's not that's not too good of an explanation.
No, sure.
Most games have those, a couple of plays that you could say, if that had gone differently, then you would have changed strategy like such and such, and then things would have, been this and that. But, I mean, there's no question that the Bengals let that game get away from them in the second half.
Sure. I guess, one of the questions that we could ask about the Bengals is they're 2-2 now that they won last night. They were 1-2 going into the game. They've played some at least theoretically difficult teams, right? The Denver Broncos, last year's champions, the Steelers, who preseason were expected to be one of the contenders for this year. Obviously the Jets were good last year. Are the Bengals a little bit of a victim of a strong schedule? I know some of this gets a little tricky given that now that we've seen the Jets, they got blown out last week by Kansas City. The Steelers got blown out last week by Philadelphia. So it's hard a little bit to tease this out, but are the Bengals a little bit a victim of a strong schedule, a difficult schedule, and will that be sort of the case going forward, or do we sort of think that the Bengals are just sort of struggling because they're struggling?
Well, it's interesting to try to figure out if they've played a hard schedule so far. I went and I ran every team's schedule so far based not on DVOA, but based on Dave, which incorporates our preseason projections.
Right.
And when you do that, the Bengals come out as playing an average schedule so far. But that's because the Jets are very low because we didn't project them to be a good team, and they haven't been a good team.
Right.
And the Broncos are lower than you would expect because we didn't project them to be a good team. And the Steelers are lower than you would expect because of the one loss to Philadelphia.
Right.
So I think that is another, in which case context is important. And I do think this has been a tough schedule so far. And the good news for the Bengals is it gets easier, starting with Miami. But obviously, for the rest of the season, they have something like the 6th easiest schedule in the league. Okay. And their schedule is a little bit easier than Pittsburgh's and a little bit easier than Baltimore. The problem is that, for one thing, anything that makes Cincinnati's schedule easy also makes Pittsburgh's schedule easy and Baltimore's schedule easy for the most part.
Right.
Because they're playing the same divisions. And the NFC East looks like a much tougher division to play against than we thought before the season. The Giants look better. The Cowboys look better than we expected. And the Eagles look much better than we expected.
Right. So actually, that's potentially an interesting place to pivot a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the Steelers and the Eagles. So that game went, I think, a lot differently than anybody expected last week. So at this point, the Eagles offense, they're now ranked 5th in DVOA. Carson Wentz, is he really as good as all the pundits, that are lavishing such praise on him? Is he really that good, or is there something else going on here?
Carson Wentz is your Lord and Savior. Bow down to him. No, I'm kidding. He's not. I mean, the funny thing about the whole question of is Carson Wentz overrated is who is doing the rating.
Sure.
Okay, right? Like, is Carson Wentz? What do you think Carson Wentz is? His head coach is comparing him to Peyton Manning after 3 games.
Right.
That seems a little excessive to me.
Sure.
And Eagles fans think he is, they think that he's the MVP of the league. Again, a little excessive to me. However, has he played really well? Yes. Is he in an offense that helps him? Yes. But has he played really well? Also, yes. I don't think you can doubt that he's been excellent so far. He is currently 5th in passing DYAR among quarterbacks. Now, here's the criticism of Wentz. The criticism of Wentz is that it's a very horizontal offense. It's the same offense that Doug Peterson had with Andy Reid in Kansas City.
Okay.
Designed for Alex Smith with a lot of short passes. They have not gone deep. The average length of Wentz's passes this year has been about 6.9 yards through the air. Now, that's among the lowest of any starting quarterback.
Okay.
Simeon is about that, and Rivers is a little bit lower, but otherwise that is really the lowest for any regular starting quarterback this year.
Right.
Now, I am not among the people who believes that yards after the catch are 100% a receiver. I do think there is something to be said for a quarterback's ability to identify the correct receiver who can get yards after the catch because of how the coverage is.
Sure.
Right? I do not think that it's just that it's 100% receiver. But there's no doubt that yards after the catch are more related to a receiver's ability, usually, than the quarterback's ability, and more related to the receiver's ability than the air distance of a pass. So that's the criticism of Wentz, right, is that he's running this very horizontally oriented offense. But, golly, he's running it really well, isn't he?
Sure.
He's like a step up from Alex Smith, and that's in his first 3 games. Like, he's running that offense better than Alex Smith usually does, and he's a rookie.
Right.
So we got to give him props for that. And maybe the downfield stuff comes later on, in which case even better.
Right.
So I think that's the whole thing about Wentz is it's like, is he overrated? Well, how are you considering him rated?
Sure. Well, so an interesting comparison to make is Dak Prescott is a rookie playing for Dallas, and so we said earlier that Philly, they have the 5th ranked offense in DVOA. Dallas has the 4th ranked offense in DVOA. So how should we be comparing Wentz to say Dak Prescott? Like how does Prescott have similar type metrics to Wentz?
Yeah, he does actually. Dak Prescott is 6th in passing DYAR and has more running value than Wentz. So Prescott has also been excellent. Now, you look at the players around them. Prescott has the advantage of a really good offensive line.
Right.
But Wentz also has the advantage of a good offensive line. Not as good as the Dallas offensive line, but a good offensive line. The Dallas offensive line's strength is more run blocking than pass blocking, although they're excellent at both. And they've both been really good. Now, the one thing is Prescott has thrown his passes much farther than Wentz.
Right.
Okay, Prescott's average yards to the air is 8.3 compared to Wentz at 6.9. So Prescott is running a more vertical offense. At the same time, neither of them has played a particularly hard schedule so far.
Right.
Chicago has a horrible defense.
Yeah, right.
Washington does not have a good defense. Cleveland does not have a good defense. The Giants' defense is good, right, that the Dallas has played. And Pittsburgh defense is, not that good.
Right.
Neither one has really played too tough of a schedule so far. But they both, I don't want to take anything away from either of them. I think they've both been impressive. They've both been really impressive. And the funny thing is, I get people criticizing me on Twitter about, does this shake our belief in Cubase, which is our quarterback projection system for college quarterbacks, which did not think very highly of Wentz? And the answer is no, because one, we know it's going to get some guys wrong. That's kind of built into the system. Projecting quarterbacks is tough.
Right.
One quarterback doesn't prove a system wrong. But the other is, the whole point this year was nobody knows quite what to expect from this guy because he's a 1AA quarterback who only played half his last year because of injury.
Right.
Right? So the whole point was to be determined. So maybe what we've learned from Carson Wentz is, golly, it is really hard to judge one AA quarterbacks.
Sure. And I don't know, I guess sort of building off of that a little bit, does this, so the Philly, they beat Cleveland, they beat Chicago, but then they smoked the Steelers. Is that a fluke, or is there something that we're not sort of considering about the Steelers? Like, is this something that that Philly is actually that good, that they're that much better than the Steelers, or again, was this something that's just sort of fluky that happened with this one game?
Well, games could be fluky. I'm guessing this game is fluky in that the Steelers are not this bad all year.
Right.
Okay, because if you think of the knowledge we had of these teams going into this game, look, we know there's talent on the Philadelphia defense. Okay,
right.
We know Jim Schwartz has schemed some very good defenses in the past. We know that defense was 5th in DVOA through the midpoint of last year. So there is the talent is there for that to be a very good defense.
Sure.
We also know the Pittsburgh offense is really good. And I think that we come out of that game, I have a much more strong belief that it was a fluke for Pittsburgh than it was a fluke for Philadelphia. I think that in the long run, we'll see that Pittsburgh is a really good team.
Right.
But I don't think that Philadelphia is going to fall off from this all the way. I think they're not as good as they've looked so far, because this game was a little fluky, and the first 2 games were against bad teams.
Right.
But I think that we have, learned enough through 3 games to be able to say that it is very likely that Philadelphia is now an above-average team and the favorite in that division.
Okay. So getting back to the Steelers for a second, so they're now, after that game, they are 22nd in DVOA, but they are 8th in Dave, so combining the preseason projections with what's happened so far this year. I guess, what you're essentially suggesting is that gap will close, that maybe Dave is more predictive of how they're going to be going forward than their current DVOA is. Should we be concerned about the Steelers, I guess, is sort of the question that I want to be asking right now. Was that, again, something that was that game concerning, or is that game something that was a little bit of a fluke and they'll recover and they'll be good the way that we thought they would be?
I think there are concerning things in that game and how Pittsburgh has played. But remember, Pittsburgh was 4th in DVOA through 2 games. So this really is just one huge upset. And because it's only one of 3 games so far, it really just knocks them down. But there are concerning things in that game. One is the inability of any receivers on that offense other than Antonio Brown to really make something for themselves. That is a worry.
Right.
Because without Martavis Bryant, they need someone to step up. They don't have Ladarius Green either, so they need Jesse James to step up. They need, Wheaton or Coates or Hayward Bay or Eli Rogers or somebody to really be a weapon.
Right.
Getting Le'Veon Bell back is a big deal. And they've already said that we should expect to see some Le'Veon Bell split out with D'Angelo Williams in the backfield, with both of them on the field at the same time.
Okay.
It's a good idea. Also, I would be a little worried about the Pittsburgh defense. It's 26th so far in DVOA. Even after the first 2 games against kind of easy opponents, they were 14th. So, not that easy because Cincinnati was among them. But, I would be a little bit worried about the defense giving up so much to Philadelphia this week. But overall, I'm not worried about Pittsburgh overall. I think Pittsburgh is a quality.
Yeah, just to sort of, use quote some of the statistics that we've been collecting. Roethlisberger so far this year, under pressure on 20.3% of his dropbacks. That's the 4th most so far. Last year, that number was down at 8.8%. Is this something that his offensive line just, they've had a bad 3 games, or should we be worried about his protection?
I'm expecting it's mostly that they've had a bad 3 games and that Philadelphia defense really got to them.
Sure. Okay. So there's the Steelers, right? They have that big gap that I cited earlier between their current DVOA and their Dave. There's a couple other teams that have had some concerning results so far in the first 3 games of the season. 2 of those, being the Cardinals and the Panthers. So, the Cardinals are 15th in DVOA this year, but their Dave still has them ranked 4th. They're 1-2 after a somewhat surprising loss to the Bills last week. And then the Panthers, 14th in DVOA, 11th in Dave. They're 1-2 after losing to the Minnesota last week. I'm sure that was crushing to Scott. Maybe it's good that he's not the one doing the podcast this week because, he might just be crying all over the microphone right now. But should we be concerned about, these teams, the Steelers, the Cardinals, the Panthers, will they recover? Is there any one team among those three that we should be concerned more about than the others?
Well, the first thing I can say as a Patriots fan is don't flip over a 1-2 start. Because I do remember 2 years ago when the Patriots started 1-3 and everybody declared them over.
Sure. Yep.
So you got to take the long term. I am not worried about the Panthers.
Okay.
I am not worried about the Panthers because, first of all, what the Panthers have going for them most is their division. I do not think Atlanta is as good as we've seen so far. I think that some of that has been their competition. I don't think Atlanta truly has the number 2 offense in the league.
Right.
I think that some of that is, will come out once the opponent adjustments start going in next week.
Right.
Now, if Carolina may lose this game in Atlanta this week because it's in Atlanta, but I still think in the long run, Carolina is the best team in that division. And we projected before the season that they were not going to be one of the top 5 teams in the league. Right. So the fact that they're not one of the top 5 teams in the league is not a huge surprise. I still think they're the class of that division.
Right.
The Cardinals worry me more. And here's why. Because if you asked yourself, when we projected the Cardinals as one of the top 3 teams in the NFL going into this year, and you asked yourself, what is the most likely thing that will make this projection wrong other than injuries? The answer was the quarterback is old, and you never know when a quarterback who's old is going to just go.
Sure.
And Carson Palmer has not been as good this year as he was last year. And the fact is that last year was significantly better than he was the year before. Okay, as much as people talk about Palmer's sort of resuscitation over the last couple of seasons, in 2014, the main reason why his numbers were really good was that he played the easy part of the Arizona schedule, and Drew Stanton and Ryan Lilly played the hard part of the Arizona schedule. So Palmer was good, not great, in 2014. And if Palmer's back to being good, not great, that's a big knock on this team. They're also not getting a lot out of Michael Floyd right now.
Yeah.
But I do think Arizona in the long run, I think they are more the team that beat Tampa Bay 40-7 than they are the team that lost to the Bills.
Right.
But I think they may be more the team that lost to the Patriots by 2 than the team we thought they were going into the season.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm also a Patriots fan. I remember those seasons well. You definitely don't want to freak out. I even remember how much people were freaking out over the fact that the Patriots started one season, I don't remember which one it was, 0-2 after getting smoked by like the Bills or somebody, and then ended up finishing that season 14-2. So
the reason why most teams don't make the playoffs when they start 0-2 is because they're not good enough to make the playoffs in the first place. Like it's bad to start 0-2. It's bad to start 1-2. Every win is important. You only get 16 of them, right? You only get 16 shots.
Right.
But don't write anybody off with a 1-2 record. There's still a lot that you can do with a 1-2 record. 0-3 is harder.
Right.
But 1-2 you can come back from.
Right. Okay. Excellent. So let's transition again. So in your DVOA article from this week, you explain how things are looking similar to the way that they were last season, in that extreme defenses are looking more extreme than the extreme offenses are. So, the best defenses are better than the best offenses. The worst defenses are worse than the worst offenses. And most of the best overall teams have the best sort of defense-oriented teams. Do you have any ideas or theories now that this is happening for a second year in a row, why this kind of thing might be happening?
I'm not sure. Any idea that I might have is totally conjecture and just a guess, just a shot in the dark.
Sure.
The one idea I think that makes some sense might be that we are sort of going through a little bit of a quarterback lull right now, where the best quarterbacks of the last few years are getting older, But at the same time, the younger quarterbacks have not blossomed yet, as well as Wentz and Prescott are playing right now.
Right.
Luck has still never quite prospered to the level that we've hoped or expected from him.
Sure, yeah.
And some of it has to do with, the players around him, and the same with Russell Wilson this year. But, a lot of the top picks of the last few years have not been quite as good as you might have expected. That's the one idea that I have, because the flip of that is that none of the bad quarterbacks have been as bad as you might have expected the last couple of years. We haven't had any Jamarcus Russell level busts.
Right.
Really,
Right.
But I'm not sure I don't know if it's financial, salary cap related. I don't know why it is that the best offenses are not as spectacular as they were 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I know that there's sort of this idea of parity in football, but it seems like even that seems like a tough explanation to give necessarily, because I mean, it's as much as there's parity, it still feels like the Patriots keep doing well every year. The Steelers, with some blips here and there, keep doing pretty well every year. Like, there are the teams that are actually starting to build some consistent quality for themselves. So, I mean, it's kind of perplexing what this shift that might be occurring is. How about thoughts potentially on two of the more sort of surprising teams that are currently ranked in the top 6 of DVOA so far this year? Some teams that are very definitely defense driven. The Vikings, who have the number 24 offense but the number 3 defense, and then there's the Ravens, who have the number 26 offense and the number 5 defense. Both of these teams being in the top 5 in pressure rate. Are these two teams for real that are going to be around all year and potentially contending for those playoff spots?
Yeah, I'm not that surprised. We had the Vikings defense not projected this good, but we knew the talent was there, right? Everybody was expecting a big step forward subjectively.
Sure.
So I'm not surprised that they did it. And the Ravens, we said that they were going to be better on defense, and they are. I mean, it's just, last year the biggest problem was a lack of takeaways, and that was probably going to regress towards the mean. I think the Ravens defense may not be quite as good as it's looked because the schedule, and I think the Vikings defense may be even better than it's looked because of the schedule.
Right.
But I'm not too surprised by either of those teams. We didn't think the Vikings defense was going to be quite this good, but we knew that it was definitely a possibility. Subjectively, everyone knew that was that was sort of a storyline that made a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, as good as the Vikings have been, I think obviously the surprise last week in their ability to handle Carolina and win that game by as many points as they did, given that Sam Bradford's only in his second week being the quarterback there. That has obviously some of the surprise, but when their defense is playing as well as they are, they can potentially keep certain teams under control enough for somebody like Sam Bradford, who's still learning the offense, to do at least put some points on the board, right?
Yeah, on one hand, I think there's been a little bit of over excitement about Sam Bradford's performance so far. On the other hand, you do have to see his performance in the context of A, learning a new offense, and B, that offensive line may be one of the worst in the league. So the fact that he's able to do it behind that line is his receivers are not really that great other than Stephon Diggs. So he's not doing it with great weapons.
Right.
So, I think 24 offense and 3 defense, I don't know. Sounds about what to expect from Minnesota for the rest of the year. Maybe instead we should expect 18 offense and 6 defense, but it will still be roughly the same quality of team. But that's one of the top teams in the league right now, and looks like they will be going forward. That's a really good division. You know what? Green Bay, Detroit is, I think, better than people would expect, despite the fact that they're 1-2. Their defense is probably not going to be 31st in the league all year. Green Bay, of course. Those 3 teams are good teams. Not great teams. Detroit's not a great team, but that's 3 good teams at least.
Right. Okay. So before we go, I wanted to give you some props, Aaron. Last week on the podcast with Scott, when you guys were talking about the Patriots and Texans matchup coming up, it was sort of a little bit of kind of a tangential comment that you made, a little bit of an afterthought, but you mentioned how consistently good over the last several years the Patriots special teams has been, and how consistently bad the Houston special team has been. And you're kind of just tossing it in there as a comment, as something that might rear its head. And lo and behold, there were 2 kickoffs that the Texans fumbled that led to Patriots points. And I just wanted to give you props for how prescient you ended up being with that particular comment.
Thanks. I didn't think it was going to be that bad. It was
right. Well, so that's bad. That's one of those things, though, that the thing that has, in terms of DVOA, the thing leading with the Patriots is that special teams. And, I know that certain people might take the perspective that, the Patriots got lucky, like 2 kickoffs ended up in fumbles, but this is the kind of things that the Patriots have consistently been able to generate, right? I mean, that maybe not, turnovers in the red zone kind of thing a ton, but like their special teams helps drive their success.
Right. What's not luck is that the punt coverage team covers so well that Houston couldn't even try to return a punt.
Yeah, right.
What's not lucky is that they are playing the new kickoff rules amazingly well and having Gostkowski, instead of boom it through the end zone, drop it at like the 4. Right. One of those fumbles was the guy took it out of the end zone like an idiot. Right. I don't know why anyone is taking the ball out of the end zone at this point this year.
Right.
The chances of fumbling or getting tackled before the 25 are stronger than the chances you're going to break it for a touchdown. But the other one landed at like the 4, and they had no choice. They had to return it.
Right.
And that's the smart thing. I'm going to make another prediction here, though. Maybe not a prediction, but I'm going to make a statement about the new kickoff rules.
Okay.
And I would love to see a team prove me right here. I don't understand why any team, after a 15-yard penalty, if there's a 15-yard like unsportsmanlike or roughness or something penalty on a touchdown, and the kicking team gets to kick from the 50, why are they ever kicking away ever? I don't get it at all.
Right.
Why you don't onside kick every single time from the 50. If you fail, all you've done is lost 15 yards.
Right.
They get the ball at like the 39 or the 40 or the 41 instead of the 25. And if you succeed, you get another possession. Why is any team kicking away from the 50 ever?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are probably some built-in just, conservativeness.
And the first team that does a surprise onside kick from the 50 is going to get it, and it's going to become a thing, because I don't understand why anybody kicks away from the 50. Makes no sense.
Right. Well, we'll see. I mean, anything that the teams can do to make the games more interesting would be fun to watch. But all right, I think that'll do it for us today, Aaron. Thanks again for coming on, and we'll talk again next week. I guess probably with Scott, but there will always be a podcast between the two of our organizations. So again, great to talk to you.
There will always be a podcast. And I will point out for folks, Sports Info Solutions does power the new premium charting data on Football Outsiders. We are fiddling with it. We're going to get up a thing where you can sort cornerbacks by either qualified or not qualified coming in the next few hours. We hope people are really enjoying the premium charting data. And we're working on getting some more stuff up, and it's the really interesting information there. People should check it out.
Absolutely. All right. Great. Thanks, Aaron.
Talk to you next week.
All right. Bye.